General Lehnert, it's a pleasure to have you here.
And it's a pleasure to be here in the University of Richmond.
And thank you very much. The Jepson School is a liberal arts-based approach to leadership studies. Years ago, I heard somebody at West Point talking about what qualities you want to build into a young officer who's holding a bridge in Bosnia, what kind of knowledge he or she has to have. And they really emphasize the importance of liberal arts background in leadership. And I wonder if you could comment on, as you've seen leadership in the Marine Corps and in other venues, the importance of that kind of education.
Well, Al, it's extraordinarily important. In fact, without being flippant or anything, there's always an old joke about what do you call a history major in the Marine Corps, and it's called second lieutenant, because we've found that it's extraordinarily important to have our officers have a clear understanding of the past. And we also believe that the liberal arts education quite often gives our officers a sense of at least the ability to appreciate and to gain a cultural awareness, because as you might imagine, Al, they send us to a lot of places where that are not necessarily representative of the kind of cultures that we grew up in.
Right. What are some of the really tough decisions that you've had to make in the Marine Corps, that perhaps some that engage ethics, because I know that's a concern of yours?
Yeah, I've had 13 separate commands, which is a large number. And the way you get in the next command is you do fairly well in the previous one.
Right.
So if you screw up some decisions too often, then you won't lead Marines any longer.
Right.
I enjoyed leading Marines because they were, they're just an incredible group of young people. Most of them are quite young, about the age of our students here at the University of Richmond. Many of the decisions that I had to make, of course, dealt with determining the amount. It's usually a risk assessment in terms of the gain to be achieved in proportion to the risk of, because quite often we're asked to travel in harm's way. The reason I'm here tonight, of course, is to talk about Guantanamo Bay, and that was probably the most difficult time. The 100 days that I spent down there to stand up the detention facility in the absence of any clear guidance, or when there was guidance, often it was contradictory.
This was starting in 2003 or
That's right,
so?
Al. It's when we were right after, well, actually 2002. It was immediately after the 9/11 events when President Bush decided to send troops into Afghanistan, and we began picking up people all over the countryside who didn't seem to have a very good excuse for why they were there. And then, of course, there was a huge policy debate as to whether to send them to the United States or to send them somewhere else. And of course, Guantanamo was selected because it acts and it's acted for many administrations as an extra legal place to put the flotsam and jetsam of U.S. foreign policy. And I was selected to go down there and set up those camps and run them until I could be relieved by an Army-led joint task force, because I was already scheduled in the event that we were going to invade Iraq to go to that particular venue. So there was a lot of really tough decisions, most of them moral and ethical and legal, in terms of what we stand for as a nation, what we stand for as a country, and at the same time dealing with the extraordinary political pressures, because as all of us of a certain age recall, we'd been attacked without provocation. We were angry, and our political leaders knew that if they didn't solve this, they probably weren't going to get reelected.
Right. Yep. Okay. I have a nephew who was a captain of the Marine Corps, and he had 2 tours in Iraq. The second one, the mission was to turn things over to the Iraqis. They were out on patrol, and several Iraqi soldiers got into an IED, and my nephew made the judgment that the only way that they were going to live was to call in American helicopters. And his Iraqi counterpart said, you can't do that, because if you do, that'll pull the rug out from under me if every time things get tough, the Americans are. And he said that was the toughest decision he ever had to make. And my students were impressed with that. And I thought the interesting thing was that he said, you don't look in a cookbook for that. I mean, there's nothing in the training manual that you have to make tough decisions like that involving people's lives all the time.
The first point I think I would make, Al, in response to that is that your nephew and hundreds and thousands of other young men and women are some of the most extraordinary leaders that I have ever met. You know, if there's anything that gives me hope for the future of this country, is that those young people are going to go on to become captains of industry, to lead in the public sector. But he was exactly correct. It is extraordinarily difficult. These decisions are just they're gut-wrenching. Yeah. Now, what the Marine Corps tries to do, and I suspect the other services work this way as well, but the Marine Corps has a profoundly, actually difficult ethical decision-making course for their young second lieutenants, and they throw them into some situations and scenarios for which there is no good decision.
Right.
There is just simply a least bad decision.
Right. Right.
Because that's the way the world works nowadays.
Yeah. But you have to make a decision, and you have to make it quickly in many cases, and that's difficult.
Yeah, doing nothing is an option, but it's generally not a very good option.
Yeah. In your experience, what is similar about leading in the Marine Corps and in other domains of life, and what's different? Would you say it's, on the whole, leadership in the Marine Corps and the military is a completely different animal than leading in other domains, or are you more impressed with the similarities?
Yeah. Well, first off, I would say that if you are a successful leader in the Marine Corps or the other services, you are likely to be successful regardless of where you go for the remainder of your life. But there are some differences. One of the things that we have in this all-volunteer force is the fact that our young troops are the best we've ever had. So one of the challenges of a leader is not in motivating them, not in getting them to attack that next hill, or seize that city, or protect that convoy, but to set the conditions so that they come home alive. Right. An 18-year-old Marine thinks they're bulletproof.
Right.
And at the same time, they're smart, they're motivated. So what you have to do is make sure that they're properly trained and that they understand their left and right lateral limits, so that they can come home to their sweethearts and their moms and their dads.
Right. Okay.
So it's a different type of leadership. It's I had an educator one time who was watching an exercise, and she says, "How do you force them to do that?"
Yeah.
And I said, we don't force them to do anything.
Right.
The biggest challenge is making sure they don't hurt themselves.
Yeah, that's so interesting, because I think many people think that leadership in the military is unique because it rests largely on obedience, and certainly obedience is part of it, but there's much more than that. And it seems to me it's very much the same kind of leadership in terms of motivating people. Yeah. Helping them make good judgments, training them to make good judgments.
Al, the thing I miss most of my 37 years in the Marine Corps are the Marines, particularly the young ones that I worked with. One of the reasons that I went on this lecture circuit, so to speak, is the opportunity to interact with students, because they remind me in many ways a great deal of my Marines. They're motivated, they're smart, they're enthusiastic about life, and they don't know the meaning of failure yet.
At West Point, I heard some very interesting conversations about what the dropout rate should be during beast barracks, the summer before people start. And the dropout rate had become pretty low, and some people were saying that, well, if it's too low, we're not being firm enough. But if we're doing good selection, we ought to be working with people who who can do it. And in the Marine Corps, do you feel that the selection criteria are about right, that you pick the right people, that you challenge them enough so that the people who do make it are the finest quality?
Yeah, let me address both the officers and the enlisted.
Okay.
Our officer corps is so selective now that I have often asked myself whether or not, when I came in 1970, whether I would have been able to make it in. Okay? And among our enlisted Marines, among the age cohort of our folks that would normally enlist, 3 out of 4 can't enlist because of what I call the 3 M's: mental, moral, and medical. So you're left with only 25% of the population of this country that's even qualified for enlistment. Wow. And then you take that group, and only 1 out of those 25, or 1 in 100, volunteers for service in our U.S. military. Right. So I would say that, much like the biblical quotation, the Lord said unto Gideon, thy people are too many, take them down to the water and I will test them there. I think we're being pretty selective right now. Yeah.
So they're good people.
They're great.
Both at the officer corps and...
They are absolutely the best this country can produce. Yeah.
One thing that's impressed me in a course I teach on Civil War leadership is how many officers can rise to a certain level but then no higher. For example, in reading about Battle of Gettysburg right now in Michael Shara's book, The Killer Angels, Stonewall Jackson's been killed. Richard Ewell has been a good division commander, doesn't seem to be able to operate at the corps level. Right. And you see so many generals like that. Then you see people like Grant who are able to move up steadily and take on more and more responsibilities successfully. What's the key ingredient in a person being able to keep rising to successful command at higher and higher levels where the challenges are different and I would guess more difficult?
Yes. Well, I think the first thing is that for every officer that's in, it's a meritocracy. It's an up or out. You have to know yourself, and you have to know your weaknesses and your limitations, and you have to have the moral courage to actually say, you know what, I probably would not be the world's best corps commander. And that's a tough thing to do. The other thing is that your leadership has to have the insight to say, all right, do we have someone that has that actual vision, that broadness of vision, to be able to appreciate the biggest possible picture, as opposed to, the fact that, like old Baldy Ewell, like you said, a very good division commander, a disaster as a corps commander.
It is
it's
very
just too much for him.
And then you have people like Burnside who tell Lincoln, I'm not your guy. And he was right, but Lincoln put him. So it's
at that point, as much as I respect President Lincoln, it's on the president now.
Yes.
It's on the president.
Absolutely. I know we have to wrap up in just a minute, but let me ask you to talk about leaders who have most impressed you in the military, in politics, and in any domain that you think really have shown leadership qualities that are that are extraordinary, that would be good models for our students to take seriously.
Goodness. Well, first off, I'm going to go back a long way to one of my personal favorites, and that was the Roman Emperor Cincinnatus. I like him because although he was asked to serve, and he did serve, and he served well, as soon as the crisis was over, he went back to his farm.
That's right.
I think there is a very important message there that we should all take into account. I liked Wellington in the Napoleonic Wars. I thought that he actually was something of an iconoclast because he was one of the first to begin actually paying attention to the welfare of the troops. And they served him well. And they rose above what they saw as their own capabilities and what their officers considered their own capacity and capabilities.
So looking after the men.
Yes, looking after the men. Now
is really important.
Now, if you want to bring it to to the modern world, last Friday, we had what is referred to as a passage of command in the Marine Corps, and the new commandant is a gentleman by the name of Joe Dunford. Forbes magazine listed him among the 50 best leaders in the world.
Wow.
No other military person was mentioned. No other political leader in this country was mentioned. I would say that he, every place that he's gone, he has demonstrated what I would consider to be servant leadership.
Mm-hmm.
While he's a very effective and a very strong leader, you always get the impression that he has his subordinates' best interests at heart.
Yeah.
I think that's a quality that many people in positions of leadership today could perhaps study a little bit more.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think we have to wind this up, and I'm very grateful to you. It's an honor to have you at the University of Richmond and the Jefferson
Thank you,
School.
Al.
Thank you very much.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you very much.